Autumnal Gloom, Howlpack Resurgence, from the past set. Oh, and for the sideboard, I had a couple of examples: Biting Rain, Root Out, these type of cards. Okay, so that's it for the grading review. Let's get right into the cards here. We're going to start things off with blue. Again, we like to rotate the colors just in the interest of fairness to those colors. Make sure we're talking about everything the same amount. And that leads us to our first rare, Owen. It is Coax from the Blind Eternities. It's kind of weird. It's 2 and a blue for a sorcery. It's rare. It says, you may choose an Eldrazi card you own from outside the game or in exile. Reveal that card and put it into your hand.
Wow.
What does that even mean? Does that just mean I can go into my sideboard in Limited?
Yeah, that's what it means, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, I think so too.
So the first time I looked at this card, I actually just thought it said, search your library for an Eldrazi and put it in your hand. Mm-hmm. And I was about ready to give it a D- at that point. But now I'm just at a full F. The thing is, to overcome the fact that you have a card that doesn't affect the board, it's slow, it's kind of weird, you have to win the game a huge percentage of the time that you're with the card that you're tutoring for. At that point, you would just put that card in your deck.
Exactly.
So for Limited, you just put the card in your deck.
Yeah.
Maybe if you had so many, like your Eldrazi card has to be so good that you win, like let's say a Decimator of Provinces or an Emrakul, and you'd rather just put that in your deck. And the reason you would want to play this instead is because you don't want to have too many bad cards in your deck in the early game. Maybe if you got like 5 Decimator of the Provinces, I could see it. Play 2 in the main, 3 in the board, and then one of these.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the problem, of course, is that this card is also bad in the early game, right? Like you can't, I mean, at least you're using your mana, but like that's not exactly a glowing review of a Magic card. Well, at least I used some mana, right? It's pretty bad.
This card is really, 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 really bad.
Yeah. I like your dream pool, though. I'd like to see a picture of that one on Twitter. The 5
like,
mythics
that's
or whatever.
The only possible scenario. I would have to have like, maybe if I had like 3 Emrakuls and 3 Decimator, and having this card means I can choose between the two when I play it, but it's just, just way too bad.
Right, so F for Coax from the Blind Eternity is not going to be seen play there. The next one is called Docent of Perfection. I think it's called Docent. Is it Docent or Docent? I'll have to look that one up. I'm going to say Docent of Perfection for now, though. It's 3 blue for a insect horror. It is rare, and it's a 5/4 with flying for 5 mana. Now, I can tell you that there's more to this card, but it's all upside. So we're talking about, vanilla test-wise, we've got a 5/4 flying for 5. So I'm already way in on that. I'm a big fan of a 5/4 flyer for 5 mana. So if there's anything even remotely good about the rules text, then this card is going to be hard to give anything other than the A range in my mind. And it says, so here's the rules text. It says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a 1/1 blue human wizard creature token onto the battlefield. Then if you control 3 or more wizards, transform Docent of Perfection. Now, I want to note that Docent is an insect horror. It doesn't count itself on the wizard scale. When it transforms, it becomes Final Iteration, which is a 6/5 flying Eldrazi insect that gives all wizards you control +2/+1 and flying, and it still has that ability that whenever you cast an instance or sorcery, you get a 1/1 human.
Yeah, this card is just totally busted.
Wow, what a great card.
It's incredible. It's just awesome.
Yeah.
The only thing that you could even possibly criticize about this card is that it does have 4 toughness for 5 mana, and that you don't get anything when it comes into play, and you don't get anything when it dies. So you could reasonably play this card for 5 mana, and then your opponent could throttle it, and then the game continues as normal. It's not like the end-all, be-all, instantly win the game when you play it, but it's as close to that as you're going to get. I feel pretty comfortable giving this just a clean A.
I give it an A as well. Yeah, Docent of Perfection just meets the floor so well, and I totally agree with your extra point, though, and that is worth noting, because to get into that A+ Super Bomb territory range, you need things to happen now. You need a card like this that also affects the board. Thinking back to like the Titans, right? To cards these cards that affect the battlefield when you play them, even if they die.
Or like a Wormcoil Engine.
Wormcoil Engine's a great one.
No matter how far behind you are, you're going to win when you get it, and it's resilient to removal.
Exactly. Yes. But Docent isn't. But still, it's an A. What a great card! I cannot wait to open and play that one. I mean, god dang, that's insane. It turns all your little creatures into little mini what's it
Snapping
called?
Drakes, Cloud Mantis.
Insectal aberrations, I think, is the idea.
Oh yeah, that's it.
Yeah, little flying bugs. All right, next is called Identity Thief. It's 2 blue for a 0/3 shapeshifter at rare. So we're not blown away by the stats, but it says not yet. Whenever it attacks, you may exile another target non-token creature. If you do, Identity Thief becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn. Return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Wow. This is why we have the rares in Mythic Rare show, because these type of cards are very strange, right? So we're talking about an 0/3 for 4 that wants to attack, okay, which automatically sounds weird. But you're going to exile another creature. Now, this is really important because it's a non-token creature, so it doesn't get to just mow down tokens. They did make sure of that. But it gets the creature out of the way. So whatever that creature was is exiled and is no longer going to be able to block Identity Thief. And Identity Thief is going to become a copy of it. So presumably bigger or better than an 0/3, at least when it comes to attacking. They are going to get their creature back at the beginning of the next end step. So they will be able to attack you back with it. And if it hasn't entered the battlefield trigger, it will trigger again as well. But then your Identity Thief just looks like it just stays a copy of it. No, just until end of turn. So Identity Thief goes back into 0/3 at the end of the turn as well. Weird card, man. The first thing that I think is to zoom out a little bit from the details and just note here that this only works if you're able to attack with it.
Yes. I'm going to go a little bit controversial with this one, and I'm going to give it a B-.
Okay.
For me, this looks like it's a good card, and here's why. For 4 mana on the 5th turn, if you attack, you can exile a blocker and make it into a somewhat reasonable attacker. Yeah. So in those instances, let's say you just exile a Hill Giant, you're making it so your opponent can't block, and you're attacking for 3. That's sort of like a Goblin Heel Cutter. Not as powerful because you don't have the dash, and this is conditional on a few other things. But given that a lot of the time it's going to be a halfway decent attacker, as good as your opponent's best creature, and it's going to deprive your opponent of a blocker, that's a pretty powerful effect. And on the upside, you can exile your own creatures, which means if you have your own creatures that have entered the battlefield abilities, you can just be repeating those as long as you can get this creature through. So obviously, if it's a stalled board, it's just going to be a 4 mana 0/3. It's a pretty weak defensive card. But I think that there's enough cool upside that you can maybe stitch that together and you can get it work that it's a pretty powerful, unique card.
Yeah, I mean, I would call it a reprehensibly bad defensive card, right? A 4 mana
it's really
0/3.
Bad.
Yeah.
Really bad.
Now here's a question: how much higher are you valuing this in a deck that's looking to be a little more assertive, right? Now, you talked last week about how the vast majority of the decks that you draft, and I think it's also a good general statement, that are drafted are mid-range decks of some variety. But we have definitely seen slower and faster or better curve versus, less better curve or more card advantage based builds of these mid-range decks. And, I'm wondering, where does Identity Thief best fit? Is it in an aggressive deck? And conversely, is it pretty bad in a more controlling deck, or do you still run it?
If I was a dedicated control deck, I would avoid this card, but there's some chance you play it.
I can just see some situations where you can go off with this, right?
Yeah, just a cursory glance of the Shadows over Innistrad. It looks like it's doing something cool with Drownu Corpse Trawler.
Yes, for sure.
I guess it would be a 1/1 when it attacks. That's pretty rough. But mainly I was looking at Stitched Mangler.
Mangler, yeah.
That.
I like that.
I don't recall any nice cards from this set that were working well with Enter the Battlefield ability, so maybe I'm overstating that aspect of it. Maybe it's definitely not an unplayable card. Maybe it's going to be a C or a C-, but I can see moments where it shines, and it's not embarrassing. So definitely not a premium rare and definitely not unplayable, somewhere in between.
Yeah, I agree. I think the upside on this card is very, very high. And I think the downside is quite low, to be honest. Like if you're behind, Identity Thief is pretty terrible. And I could see, I bet you anything we'll get tweets from people going, oh my God, I did this with Identity Thief. And, the other thing to keep in mind is that, if your opponent does want to play their bomb and you have an Identity Thief, it gets a little awkward for them. You get to hit them first. You get to get it out of the way. Yeah, I'm gonna go right in the middle and give Identity Thief a C or a C plus. I'll give it a C plus. I think that just to make sure that when you draft it or put it in your sealed pool, that you're considering the fact that you do need to be able to turn it sideways and attack in order to make the card good. And I think if you can, then I think it's really good.
Yeah, I agree.
Imprisoned in the Moon is next. It's 2 and a blue for an enchantment aura at rare. It enchants a creature, land, or planeswalker, and the enchanted permanent is a colorless land with tap, add colorless mana to your mana pool, and loses all other card types and abilities. Weird.
Yeah, this is effectively an Oblivion Ring with downside.
Okay.
Because you're going to totally neutralize one of your opponent's cards, effectively removing it from the board, and they're going to get a wastes. So
how big of a downside is that?
It's real. It's not negligible, and it's not such a huge downside that I wouldn't play this card. My initial impression is I want to give this card a B or a B minus.
Yeah, I was going to give it a B.
It's unconditional removal. It's just going to kill a creature, no questions asked, and in blue, which almost never gets that kind of ability. So, like, if you're a blue-white Flyers deck, like, this is much better than it would be in any other kind of deck. Like, if you're, like, blue-red and you have a lot of burn, it's a little bit worse, but it's nice because it's going to kill creatures that your burn spells aren't going to be able to kill.
Yeah.
Right. The downside of this card is just that you don't want to play it on turn 3 because you could be ramping your opponent. Usually in limited, by the time you get to turn 5, 6, and 7, giving your opponent a mana is not that big of a downside. I'm going to go ahead and say that I would never cut this from a blue draft deck, and I would pick it high and always play it. So
yeah, other things to keep in mind, it can hit lands.
Yeah, you turn a forest into a waste.
You could. I mean, the situation where that pops up would almost require me to have deck lists or a ton of information about my opponent's list, but it is possible.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it either, but you know, it's a niche scenario. Also, just remember that it hits planeswalkers. You don't face them in limited often, but when you do, if you look down at your Imprisoned in the Moon, you know, if you've played it a couple of times, you're going to get used to just killing creatures with it. But remember, it can hit planeswalkers. And then the other corner case scenario is that you can cast it on your own creature to make a land if it's just desperation time, or if next turn you just have to cast your 8-drop or whatever. So, these are all corner cases. The vast majority of the time, Imprisoned in the Moon is just going to take out an opponent's creature, and that's really good. So I agree with your original assessment. I gave it a B.
Yep.
Solid card. Mausoleum Wanderer is next. It's blue for a 1/1 flying spirit. Whenever another spirit enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Now, of note, that's not a counter. It just gets it temporarily. And then it has the activated ability. You can sacrifice it to counter an instant or sorcery spell unless its controller pays X, where X is its power. There's a lot going on here. Eric really liked this card for Constructed, but I've actually already seen it in play Unlimited, and I wasn't super impressed. It was kind of bad.
Yeah, this is pretty clearly just a card printed for the purposes of Constructed.
Yeah.
And I've got it at about a D+. I mean, it's a playable card, but it's poor. It's low power. It's inefficient. And there's a lot of words on there, but I mean, if my deck had 10 spirits in it, I'd be happy to play this card, and it would be pretty strong.
Yeah.
Just because a sometimes 2/2 flyer for 1, that's a pretty good card. The countering an instant sorcery is it's so negligible that I would almost ignore it completely because it's unlikely to come up, and if it comes up in a game, unlikely to matter. So
yeah, I like D+ for Mausoleum Wanderer just because of the spirit upside. Like you said, if you had a spirit, a white blue spirits deck, then this card would be fine in it. Otherwise, I'm looking to keep it in the board.
Yeah, I would hope to not play it.
Mind's Dilation is next, and it's it's for dreamers. It's a 5 blue enchantment at Mythic Rare. It says, all right, so here's what it does. Whenever an opponent casts his or her first spell each turn, that player exiles the top card of his or her library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast it without paying its mana cost.
Yeah, this card is just bad.
Stone unplayable, right?
It's really, really, really bad. I could see maybe putting it in my deck, but the problem is it costs 7, which is already extremely expensive. And by the time you cast it, your opponent has to not be in an advantageous position because it's so easy for them to just stop playing cards and beat you with what they've got in play. And the ability is conditional. When you mill them, you have to not hit a land.
Yes.
I saw somebody trigger this at the pre-release, and when they milled their opponent, they got a green vessel, and they were just playing a blue-white deck and just couldn't even use it. I mean, like, obviously,
That is so embarrassing.
It's really small, but obviously that comes up if you get a card you can't even use, or you don't want to use at that time. It's like makes it even worse. It's just there's such a small percentage of your opponent's deck that you want to hit that can change the game. Yeah, this card is just really, really, really bad.
Yeah, Mind's Dilation in my mind is a stone F. The crux of it is that if we're going to play a 7-mana spell unlimited, you can do it. There's some formats where it's pretty discouraged, but generally speaking, you can get away with it if you make sure that your deck is built to support it, and if it wins you the game when you play it, 80% plus of the time or whatever. Mind's Dilation is nowhere near any of that. There's a very realistic scenario where you tap out for Mind's Dilation, say go, and it does nothing for the rest of the game.
Yeah, literally no impact, as if it had no words on it at all.
Yes, except for it costs you 7 mana and a card. So yeah, I'm on F for Mind's Dilation, though I do salute your optimism if you put that card in your deck. Next is Niblis of Frost. This is a nice one. It's 2 blue for a 3/3 flying spirit at rare. It's also got prowess. So already a really nice package here. A 3/3 flyer for 4 mana is something I'm deeply interested in limited. And if you tack on prowess onto that, I'm in. I already am a big fan of Niblis of Frost. And it's even got a very relevant extra ability. It says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, tap target creature an opponent controls. That creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Wow.
Yeah, this card is extremely powerful. I have it at an A, and for all of the same reasons that we did not give the Docent of Perfection an A+, because you could just cast it and they could kill it.
Yes.
But this is better than the Docent of Perfection because it's cheaper.
It's 4 mana.
And the ability is a little bit better. I mean, when you have this card, you can get in race-type scenarios that there may well be no other card that would allow you to win it.
Yes. God, you play the instant or sorcery. Now you have a 4/4 flyer that just tapped down their best blocker or attacker.
Yep. It reminds me of Guardian of Tazim, and that card was just totally busted as well.
Totally. Yeah. I'm also giving Niblis of Frost an A, by the way. And the real kicker on this thing is that it's 4 mana. Like, you normally don't get cards this powerful for 4 mana. Even 5 mana, I'm like, wow, it's only 5 mana. I would expect 6 or 7 to get, to the level of potency that this card has. Now, this card wouldn't do well at 6 mana, I don't think. But Niblis of Frost, if this was 5 mana, I wouldn't flinch at all. Like, if
still
you just
play it, it's almost still an A.
It's almost still an A. Like, and it's 4 mana, which is infinitely better in the sense that, like, it just means that on a greater percentage of games, you're actually going to get to have it hit the battlefield and matter. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of Niblis of Frost. We both gave it an A.
Yeah. And honestly, if you just valued this at an A+, it would be almost no difference.
Yeah.
In how your drafts go.
Sure.
It's as close to it that it might as well just be it.
Yeah. Yeah, card's amazing. My God. Summary Dismissal is next. It's 2 blue for an instant at rare. It says exile all other spells and counter all abilities. Kind of weird, right? So exiling a spell means that there's a spell on the stack, and instead of getting countered, it's going to get exiled. It just goes away. It's no longer on the stack, and of course, since it's exiled, it can't resolve anymore. So it effectively counters the spell for all intents and purposes, but the card's also exiled, and it can air quotes, counter cards that can't be countered because it's not technically countering them. And then it actually counters all abilities.
Yep.
Weird.
Yeah, I've got this card at a D because at the end of the day, it is still 4 mana for a counterspell, which is an inefficient rate, and you get punished a bit more when you don't get to use it profitably. But it has the upside of being like a totally reasonable to maybe even actively good sideboard card against the emerge creatures. All the emerge creatures, you're going to kill the creature that they use to sacrifice to emerge. You're going to counter the card that they cast, and you're going to exile the ability that they get from the emerge card that they've invested so much in. Like,
oh wow,
of the Horrid Swarm, they're going to get 2 1/1s on the stack. You play this, you counter both their cards. It's a total blowout.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But I do think that there's enough decks you're going to play against in Limited that either don't have emerge or are going to have a low curve where a 4 mana counterspell is going to be too conditional. That I would tend towards not main decking it and sideboarding it in really often.
You know, it is interesting to note here, Owen, as well, that summary dismissal on the draw still doesn't interact well with most of the emerge cards that you're going to be
Oh yeah,
seeing.
it's a good point.
Yeah, they play a 3-drop and then they play their 4th land and then they can emerge right now, and you're staring at your summary dismissal with 2 islands and a swamp on the battlefield and another swamp in your hand, and you're like, well, why did I bring this in?
Yeah, it's a very good point.
Something to consider as well. Maybe skewing it towards when you're on the play. Narrow but powerful. I'm not a big fan of it either. I give summary dismissal a D. You are dismissed. Our last blue card is called Wharf Infiltrator. This is an interesting one as well. It's 1 and a blue for a 1/1 with Skulk. I know you're in on that.
I am in on it.
Yeah, it does not have lifelink. I hate to tell you, but it is a 1/1 Skulk for 2. So basically, your wheelhouse. It's a human horror, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you can draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Of course, we call that looting. So Skulk hits you, loot. I like that. And then it says whenever you discard a creature card, you can pay 2. If you do, you get a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi horror creature token. Interesting.
Yeah, this card is really powerful.
It seems good to me.
It's really, really good. The thing is, even if it was just 1/1 Skulk for 2, where when you hit them you draw and discard, that would still be really strong. Like Looter Ilkor was remarkably similar to this, and that card was like one of the best commons that there was.
Okay.
Just looters are just so good and limited.
Oh, yes.
I mean, you remember all that talk on Twitter about looting. People just love looters. They're just good.
Yes. I mean, they don't use them enough.
But now you get the bonus of discard a creature and get a 3/2, which it's going to be hard for the creature that you discard to not be cast for similar stats or be better for more mana. So the ability's not that good, but it's just another option. So I do like this card. I think it's strong.
Do you think that there's a scenario where you attack with your Wharf Infiltrator, hit, discard a creature, pay 2, and then the next turn just do it again, kind of just don't care what you're discarding and just make a bunch of 3/2s in a hurry? Like, is that a strategy that you could see actually happening? Or is it like, look, if you've got a 4-drop, wait a turn, play the 4-drop?
Well, it's context dependent, but the further ahead you get on the board, the more likely you are to discard higher casting cost cards to get 3/2s, because it's so easy to press your advantage with this.
Because you get them now.
Well, you get them immediately, and you're going to be ahead on board, and you have this creature that's dealing 1 damage every turn, so your opponent's life is going to just be going lower and lower, so there's even more incentive to just put more creatures into play.
Yeah.
So obviously it depends on what you have and whether or not, but if you can't cast a creature and you have already made a creature with this, then you should most of the time just be making another creature.
Okay. I like Wharf Infiltrator a lot.
Yeah.
The interesting scenarios are where it does get blocked, right? Where your opponent just plays like an 0/3 or an 0/4 or whatever.
Yeah, that's annoying, but
I mean, I'm not saying it really hurts the card too much. I think you still just play it and get in there.
It kind of does hurt the card, but I would still play it at the same rate. It just makes it a little bit worse.
Yeah.
Because your opponent could just play like a 1/2, and then you can't do anything unless you deal with it.
God, the card is sweet.
Yeah, I've got it at like an A or A minus.
Yeah, I don't know where to put it. Dies to literally all removal, but it's only 2 mana, so it's not really the end of the world.
Maybe it's a B plus, but it's definitely.
I'm gonna go B plus.
It's definitely a good card.
It's really good. Yeah, and I mean, looting, right? All right, so that's it for the blue cards. Some powerful stuff in there just to kick things off already. We gave 2 A's at least.
Oh yeah,
the Docent of Perfection and the Niblis of Frost. Yeah,
those
wow,
are both great.
Yeah, really good. All right, let's move on to black. Our first black rare is called Collective Brutality, and it is 1 and a black for a sorcery. It's rare. It's got Escalate, and the Escalate cost in this case is not mana. It is in fact cards from your hand. You may discard a card to add modes. Here's the modes that you can choose from. There's 3 of them. Target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose an instant or sorcery card from it. That player discards that card. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. And target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Now, the interesting thing about this is that if you wanted, for 2 mana, you could do all of them. Which is pretty powerful. I mean, discarding 2 cards in addition, of course. But, you know, taking away an instant or sorcery from their hand, killing one of their small creatures, and draining them for 2 is certainly that's a laundry list of stuff, all relatively minor effects that add up to something pretty powerful. The really interesting part about this card, though, of course, is the Escalate, is that it's discard a card. It's not extra mana. So you can do this stuff pretty early in the game.
Yep. I got this card at about a C+, and I'll tell you why. The majority of the time when you cast this card, it's going to be 2 mana, target creature gets -2/-2. That's it.
Yep.
Because a lot of the power in 2 mana to give a creature -2/-2 is killing a creature early on in the game. And early on in the game is where you're paying the highest cost for discarding cards from your hand. Because as the game goes on, it's easier to determine which of your cards have diminishing returns, like lands.
Totally.
Like, that's when you want to be escalating, is when you're discarding lands. And you don't want to discard a land to drain your opponent for 2, because many games of Limited are not decided by what each player's life total is, but instead what cards get played in the order in which they get played. Like, if I just play a bunch of if I play 5 spells and you haven't played any spells, it almost doesn't even matter what life total you're at. You're going to die eventually. So draining for 2 is at its weakest at the beginning of the game, paired with both the abilities, in fact, that are good at the beginning of the game. I mean, if you can kill a creature and then use the duress mode of this, it can be pretty good. But in general, it's hard to want to discard a land for an ability that can just miss.
Yeah, and the last ability, the loses 2 life and gain 2 life, is a very minor effect in most scenarios.
It's not worth a card when you only have access to 6 cards in the beginning of the game, 7 cards.
So, all right, so how about, what grade would you give 1 and a black sorcery, target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn?
A C.
Maybe a C.
Maybe a C+.
Yeah, B minus, C+.
Is good.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's somewhat comparable to Deadweight, right? It costs an extra mana, but it'll often get the same job done in that it'll kill something small to medium. Yeah, I don't know. And then this one, of course, if you do manage to get a card out of it, you can trade a useless card for an instant or sorcery, which there's a decent amount of. I have to note that if you look at the cards in modern Limited sets like this one, a lot of the removal are like auras, enchantments, that kind of thing. They're not all instants and sorcery, so it's not like you just are necessarily going to get something, and if you do get something, it might not be what you really want, a good removal spell or an escalate card or something. Collective Brutality is a tough one to grade.
That's a really important point you just made about the fact that you can go like, oh, I saw 10 spells, but if 3 of them are enchantments, it's like your card just got a lot worse.
Exactly, and that happens a lot. If you break down your Limited decks, you'll find that you don't play as many instants and sorceries as many people think. Out of the 6 to 9 or whatever slots that are non-creatures, a lot of times it's only 3 or 4 that are actually sorceries, because you're running your auras and stuff like that. So all right, so what do we want to give Collective Brutality?
I said C+, could easily be B-.
I'll go B-. I mean, it's reasonable removal that has some upside in some way, and I can appreciate that.
I guess discarding can fuel Delirium. You might just want to throw something in the grave to drain for 2 and just go like, I'll just take my chances. It's a madness
enabler. Yeah, whatever. This next one, Owen.
It's very good.
It's Pack Rat. It's back. Okay,
it's very, very good.
It's not quite Pack Rat, but it's amazing. It's Crypt Breaker. It's black mana for a 1/1. So 1 black for a 1/1 zombie, and that's going to be important in a minute here. You can pay 1 and a black, tap it, and discard a card to put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. Now, right off the bat, I want to just lay the scenario where you go turn 1 Crypt Breaker, land, and now you're active. Like that is just a beautiful, clean progression that immediately on turn 2, you can start discarding cards and making 2/2s. Now, this is the real kicker here. You can tap 3 untapped zombies you control to draw a card and lose a life. Wow.
Yeah, this card is super strong.
It's so good, man.
I might make myself look like a fool, but I'm pretty happy to give this just a clean A+. I think it's
baby.
I think it's so good because part of some very real percentage of the games when you play this card on turn 1, you're going to beat your opponent before he even gets the chance to play a lot of the cards in his hand.
Absolutely.
It's going to be as if your opponent got mana screwed. You're just going to kill them so quickly. And